well, you got the personification of the self, right? That's coming through. Is I instead of we worship, it's I worship. Um, and then you have the personalization of Christ. It's no longer we pray as a collective. It's I'm praying individually to God. So we have the invention of the modern self and the Carl Truman
Hmm.
sort of framework coming through, and as well as you have the individualism of rock music, and that's a bohemian spirit coming through, and then you have some Christians trying to contemporize, trying to get on with the modern times.
We're going to devote our energies to sports and gardening, all the cultural pursuits as far as they're concerned. In fact, we're going to put the goons to sleep. Meanwhile, we dig.
Greetings and welcome to the Anadromous. This is Burn Power coming to you from Tbilisi, Georgia, on an overcast but quite warm day. And today what we're going to do is have another in our series of Anadromous Dialogues. This time we're talking to an Australian guy, Australian mate, named Jesse Blayney. And he got in touch with me, and evidently he's been lurking around the channel since for at least a couple of years now. And we ended up talking about music. I think we had another subject he was interested in talking about, but we ended up talking mostly about music, which I think is a very important subject, and he has an interest in it. And in fact, more people have interest in it, and I'm planning on doing some sort of not too big, but a small group chat with some of the people in the channel who are involved with music. Also, coming up next week, Ellis Potter will return, and lo and behold, the subject is music. So you can look forward to that. Also, for those of you interested in the gathering in Georgia and you're wondering whether you should come or not, I'd like to tell you 8 people have officially signed up, so that means there's only 4 slots left. It's a lot of dedication and commitment to come here, but it will probably be one of the things you most remember doing in your life. So if you're thinking about it, you should do it. Go see the video, maybe it's around here, maybe it's at the back of this, and think about taking the time and the expense to come from wherever you are to Tbilisi, Georgia. With that in mind, besides the usual admonitions to like, share, subscribe, let's talk with Jesse.
So, what's the name of your YouTube channel?
I haven't said one yet. You can.
Oh, okay.
I need just a few. I haven't to start a YouTube channel doing chocolate.
So you look around on Twitter.
I work around Twitter and my own sort of music projects, which is my main passion. And then I've got my ideas for YouTube channel around it. It's been a joke on my Breeze Travel. Navigating Patterns. I'm sure you've heard of him.
So how did you? We are somewhat far apart, and I notice I'm getting some digital stuff. So don't move around too much because there's weird glitches in the visual when you do. So yeah. But I mean, you don't have to stay still or anything. But I notice as soon as you move, it's like.
I probably won't.
Yeah, but that's because you're in Australia and I'm in Georgia, and Georgia doesn't. It has good internet, but not the best internet. And I'm assuming Sydney has pretty good internet, but nevertheless, the distance and the fact I'm in Georgia together make it just a little dodgy. So, how did you discover my channel?
That's a great question. So When we moved old address to this new address, I started to be a little bit more active online during COVID, and I was already, I guess, paying attention to Pastor Vanaclay on YouTube. Because through different means he'd come up, and then I think you'd interviewed him, and then that was, as you say, once you find someone that you enjoy listening to or a book that you like reading, it was like, all right, what's this guy about? Let's go as many videos as we can. And then that was I think you'd started the How We Got Here series, and that's what caught me.
Oh, okay. So you've been hanging around since then, one way or another.
Well, yes. I've been more online, as the kids say, this year. But I think last year I was starting to pay attention to your channel.
Well, I started that series back in 2019.
Yeah, I think I joined like halfway through. I think you were in the 90s by that.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that was a year and a half after I started. So
I think the best your critique, I don't know if your overview of the night, I found was the most fascinating to me, I guess.
Well, of course. I think I came to your age.
Yeah. Once I'm 54 now. Gosh, yeah. So
no, it always gets interesting when you when you're listening through a series like that, and then suddenly they're in your world. It's just like, for me growing up, I would hear all about World War II, and I'd be like, oh, that was really fascinating. And now I am really fascinated by it. But as soon as they got to the 1960s, which is what I remember as a kid, I was like, oh, so it works the same. And I was always disappointed when in high school, they would do the second half of American history or something and stop with World War II. And I was like, wait, what about the stuff outside my window?
Yeah.
So what do you tell me good about yourself?
Okay. I guess we could. So what do you want to know? So we've been engaged for a long time, Christina and I. Due to different means, we've not been able to get married. Some of that's due to COVID. Some of that's due to finances. Some of that's due to the change in the laws of the land during, getting married. It's just that, and so so there's that. She's
what
at work right
What are you
now.
interested in?
What am I interested in? Oh, that's a great question. So, I've been interested in film for most of my life. Lifelong cinephile. Would watch at least one or two a week since I was 8. And then slowly along the way, my dad encouraged me to get into music, and then I resisted that for a long time. And it wasn't until, I guess, 17, 18 that I tried to get into music and music production, and then I've kind of stuck at that since through different challenges with that. I guess I've tried to pursue music seriously at least 3 times. Tried to go to university, and then a whole bunch of things happened. Then try to come back to it, and then different things happened, and then again. But then luckily I got a scholarship to come to Sydney from Adelaide, with like a Christian Bible school, and that's kind of what helped me, I guess, get serious with at least pursuing music productions or making albums, making art. And so I've been doing that ever since under different monitors, in capacities. So
what kind of music?
Broadly speaking, neoclassical. I guess it verged on like cinematic instrumental sort of. Do you know the band Hammock or Sigur Rós? You'd probably know.
I know Sigur Rós. Yeah.
That's that style, but kind of moved out of the post-rock sort of noise music, the softer style. that sort of
you probably like some of
from.
the soundtracks that have come out recently, like the Sicario soundtrack and things like
Oh,
that.
yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. The Dune soundtrack is
Joker soundtrack.
Oh,
Yeah.
you try to listen to that soundtrack and it feels like nails at the back of your skull.
Yeah.
It's just And
those were some that really stuck out to me enough to want to get the actual CD of it. So I've been kind of an aficionado. I wouldn't say I study it as much as let's put it this way. I probably have about 300 or 400 soundtrack albums. So I have maybe 50 by Bernard Herrmann alone.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So it is something I think about quite a bit. It's interesting. I taught these classes in Alaska. I did 3 years on music history. Believe me, my music history classes are like nothing you're going to ever get in school. Then I did 2 years on film and media history, but as I was doing the film history, I had one of my students was a young student in Alaska, and he went on to a music degree and ended up, he's trying to compose and things like that. But I noticed when he sent me copies of his compositions, I immediately said, okay, you're kind of in that mid 20th century, somewhere between Aaron Copland, Leonard Bernstein, with a lot of soundtrack influences. And he goes, yeah. And I have a theory, actually, that, in the middle of the 20th century, what the official classical world was trying to promote was the new modern music. So everything from Schoenberg through John Cage and Karlheinz Stockhausen, those people. Yeah. And, and then later in the 60s, you had like Pierre Boulez and all these others. But I think what the 20th century will actually be remembered for is the soundtrack music. That is to say, the further we get from it, I mean, Stravinsky is going to survive. Aaron Copland, Bernstein, they will all survive. And the reason is you can hold on to their work. There are actual melodies that people can remember. But it's hard. I mean, I really appreciate Schoenberg. I have less appreciation for Cage, but that's because I look at him as a philosopher more than anything.
Yeah.
And
yes, he's an art guru in some sense.
Yeah. But I think that people, I mean, I'm not a huge fan of John Williams, but I know so many people. For instance, if I ask non-musicians to name a living composer, usually if they know anything about soundtracks, once I remind them those are composers, then they suddenly know composers' names. It's like, oh, Howard Shore, he did Lord of the Rings, right? And they know that kind of stuff. And of course, and if I ask them, who's the best living composer, or who's your favorite, or some simple, banal question like that, they'll often say something like John Williams, because quite frankly, if I was to limit soundtrack composers and take them off the list, their minds would go absolutely blank, because who knows modern classical music? It's just one of those things. So
when did that begin, that phenomena of like kind of replacing the great composers?
Well, I think it happened because it had to happen. And that is to say that what happened was that the classical music world in the middle of the 20th century, so much of it was so ferociously abstract. If I say to someone, do you know any Beethoven? And I'm just talking like person on the street, I just bump into them, and they'll all go, yeah, didn't he do like da 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 da? And then they'll start thinking of a few, oh yeah, that Ninth Symphony, da 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 da. They'll start thinking of it. And if I move forward, people are going to have more name recognition. But by the time I get to Wagner, well, then it's going to be, the Ride of the Valkyrie. And if I go a little further, it's going to get tough. And as soon as I get to Schoenberg, no one is going to know anything in a popular level, from Schoenberg all the way through, I mean, till the 70s. The first person who might pop on their list as someone they know will then be Philip Glass.
Yeah.
Because when Philip Glass starts, that's when you've hit the minimalist postmodern school of music. And suddenly there's a possibility, at least, that an educated person, not at this point, except for the music soundtracks, the scores, most people are not going to know any contemporary classical music. Philip Glass would be the only one who's alive that most educated people might guess. If you spend any time listening to classical music at all, you're going to go, oh, Philip Glass is around, isn't he? And he is. So, but interestingly enough, Philip Glass's style changed radically. So I don't know if you have spent much time with Philip Glass. He has, of course, done movie scores, but before that, he was doing stuff like Einstein on the Beach, which I have the vinyl recording. It's like four vinyl LPs in a box, and sometimes it sounds like washing machines. Just the repetition of the cycles and stuff. It's this minimalist thing. But Leonard Bernstein, in his Harvard lectures, pointed out the key. He says, Stephen Reich can do like 20 minutes in the key of A. That's about the only note. The minimalists were just going on these small repetitious patterns. But he was really impressed by that. Bernstein was, because he loved tonal music. And even though he himself experimented with some more dissonant music, he never got to full atonality. He really wanted
in that Stockhausen sense of atonal.
Yeah. But he was really longing for the return of tonal music, because for him that was it's just like we're made to listen to that. We respond to the notes on the scale in a certain way. There's physiological things happening. There's to those notes, and I'm sure about the the harmonic series and that sort of thing. So, but the problem is, in the modernist frame, the whole point was to pull it apart and to kind of almost like, you're pulling apart television to see what makes it work.
Yeah.
And the same thing is repeated in jazz and then in rock music. I don't know if you listened to my video on Noise Enters Music.
Oh, yeah.
But,
Yeah, the punks. It's this, I guess, late revival of, what would you want to say? The spirit of the anarchists coming through in the music.
In a way.
Yeah.
I mean, but what rock added, which hadn't been present in classical, was volume. I mean, there's loud classical music, but that loudest classical music has nothing in like an amplifier, turned up to 10, making absolute distortion. And so, but I think there are a couple of reasons why. I think the reason most people started paying more attention to soundtrack music is because of those themes. If I say Star Wars to someone, they can all go da 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 da. If I say Jaws, they all go doom 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 doom. Yeah. They may not know any of the development beyond it, but they all know. I mean, it's funny. It's a 2-note theme, and yet how iconic it is. And and there are other themes that they know. So that gets people to paying attention. Also, Hollywood in the 1970s had almost abandoned the orchestral score. And we forget that it was Lucas and Spielberg who brought it back, specifically through John Williams. So even though John Williams isn't my favorite composer, he's done quite a bit of really important music. that I think, I mean, to me, if I hear too much John Williams, it's like it all starts to be this, what was it, Korngold, Holst and people. You hear all this stuff, but I think that it was the fact that the music in Hollywood was sometimes way too sentimentally using orchestral music, but it also allowed for, what is it? The Altered State soundtrack is by Pierre Boulez. You know, and it's a frightening piece of music. And then composers like Jerry Goldsmith, if you can listen to his Alien soundtrack.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
That's that. But what's interesting is that seems to also owe something to my favorite school of music, of classical music at the end of the 20th century, which is the Polish and Eastern European schools.
Oh, okay. You go on there with that.
So, because they do some, like Penderecki does something similar to what Jerry Goldsmith is doing. And I think Goldsmith has been watching Penderecki, because Goldsmith, being a real composer, is always looking for a way to get the most out of a soundtrack. And so he is, if you listen to even like St. Luke's Passion by Penderecki, it's just such a frightening piece of music. But that's the element, that's the key. It is frightening. And he meant it to be that way because he didn't want the death of Christ to be seen in a sentimental light. And it's only at the very end that I think you finally hit like this solid major chord. You know, all the way through the death and the death of Christ, the Passion, is just the most nightmarish music. But he's a Catholic and he's conveying something through that. Whereas other abstract music from the middle of the 20th century would be afraid of putting connotations like being afraid of the music.
Yeah.
They would see it more as an abstract experiment, you know, opus 36, you know, what does that mean? Whereas if you listen to Penderecki, and later when he's actually doing symphonies, there's some of them, I mean, I can't remember, I think it's the third symphony where it starts off and I think it's the third movement, and you just hear this one note and he just smashes it over and over, and it becomes so intense the way he does it, because it's not like a note, it's a conglomeration of large brass instruments.
Because that was the big thing in the 80s, actually. If you look at a lot of the sci-fi and horror soundtracks, the half note, or the in-between ghost note as well, started to come through. Predator 2 has a lot of that going on. There's a lot of that sort of, you could say, slow down jazz progressions in Jerry Goldsmith's music, or maybe it'd be interesting to see if he does the Eastern folk thing with his harmony structures. I've never looked into it.
Well,
but so also the RoboCop sort of elements start to come through. So the German idealism of music starts to come through to Hollywood, which has a huge effect on the way we interpret the narrative. Things start to become far more sequential rather than melodic. It's obviously because music is the backbone of any film, right? Music helps puts expressions to words on screens that you can't define.
Right.
And so that's a sequential sequencing. John Carpenter was a big proponent of that. Well, you also have Tangerine Dream. Those guys start coming.
Well, I've heard Carpenter's sound described as the Carillon effect, the Carillon effect, and it starts with like Ennio Morricone in some of the earlier Italian giallo horror films. But he's doing it all acoustically. But it's the idea that it's this repetitious, but dissonant repetition often. And which creates, someone compared that once to disco. And there's a lot of connections between the repetitions of disco and the repetitions of horror film music. The main difference is that in disco, it's a dream that we'll just dance all night and everything's going to be cool. I will survive, love to love you, baby. Whereas in the horror,
I love disco.
Music
I love disco. I'm such a big disco fan.
In the horror film aspect, it's we will never get out of this. It repeats and repeats. And actually, I think one could say that Bernard Herrmann kind of starts this because when he's, I mean, if you probably spent time with his Vertigo soundtrack.
I'm more familiar with Psycho. I need to watch Vertigo.
Well, Psycho, I would say Psycho and Vertigo are his two like pinnacle ones. And Psycho, first time I bought an album of the entire score, and it was in the 80s. It was really hard to find. I listened to it in the dark, and that thing scared the hell out of me, especially the third screeching violin part, which I had forgotten about because it happens again when the mother turns. And you don't think about it because at that moment it's like, whoa, it's so crazy in the movie. And I remember just being like, whoa. Another score that really scares me, but it's more of an electronic score, is Howard Shore's Videodrome. That's the only one that really, if I put that on it, turn the lights off and put it on and listen to it, there's something about that whole thing. It's just like, ugh. But it works. It's getting this mood that works apart from the movie even.
Have a copy of that.
But what Bernard Herrmann was doing was these repetitious patterns. He wasn't trying. If you go to older Hollywood movies, what you'd see is basically a continuation of Romanticism from the 19th century. And you had people like Korngold and Max Steiner and these other people, Franz Waxman and such, who were basically doing this romantic music. So there was always a lush theme. There were, strings would always be used for love scenes. There were these different codes. If you saw a British ship on the horizon, you'd hear da, 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 in the score, the Hail Britannia. And it's Herrmann who starts to make these scores where he's playing the mood of the film. He's not trying to communicate intellectually, oh, that's a British ship, nor is he trying to communicate directly in certain kinds of romantic cliches. But he's rather, and I think that's what makes him probably the greatest film composer, is he's doing something underneath. He's making the film work. And he himself said, we don't know why a film needs music, but it really does. And if you were to watch some films without music, it would be absolutely unbearable. And so, of course, and the first movie that Hitchcock made without Bernard Herrmann, which was Torn Curtain, it's just not that interesting.
Oh, okay.
And actually Hitchcock was afraid of how much Herrmann was adding to his films. Because he could get the underlying psychological tension. And but Vertigo does these repeating motifs that are quite dark, slightly dissonant, and don't go anywhere. They don't have the appoggiatura note that leads you into something. They just kind of like go around, come back, and later that's what ends up. John Carpenter ends up using that sort of motif.
The imperfect cadence.
Yeah,
you feel there. Oh, I could go so many places from here.
One more thing I wanted to mention was, do you know Goretsky?
Probably
Henryk Goretsky.
Probably through
him. And there's another composer. He's a Polish composer, and there's another composer who I like even better, who's Polish, and he Penderecki and Goretsky. Penderecki and Kilar, Wojciech Kilar, are three of my favorite 20th century composers. Them and Arvo Part, to me, kind of create a different sort of music at the end of the 20th century. And interestingly enough, all of them are Christians.
Yeah, they're all really
Interestingly enough, all of them were born either in 1933 or 34. So that means all of them have a memory of World War II. And so their music is much more tonal, although in Penderecki's case, it'll be frighteningly so in certain ways. But all of them, and their faith is integral in each of them. And in a way, they've found a way out of the postmodern dilemma. It's the only case I can find in modern culture where, you know, the modern dilemma was that you know, we're pulling things apart to see how it works, until you finally get to John Cage basically not knowing the difference between music and noise, and music and random sound. Yeah. But what these people have done is, having lived through the darkest period in maybe history, one of them at least, they have seen things actually being torn apart. So they don't want that. They want to try to put things together. However, they're all very much classically trained in the modern schools. So all of them, their early works are quite dissonant. And at a certain point, each of them breaks more towards, some people have called it post-romantic. I don't know if that's the right word. I've also heard the phrase sacred minimalism used, particularly with part.
Yeah, I like that a lot more. Although the idea of Christian romanticism is intriguing to me.
Yeah, although none of them make a big deal out of it. Yeah. They just simply make a lot of Christian music, masses, and, you know, different parts for the service and such, but also in their themes. By the way, in about 10 minutes, I am going to have to cut this and then start a new one and send you the new link. So if we get to talking and it just cuts out, just go look at your email and the new link will be there. But no, Wojciech Kilar, I heard a piece of his being sung on Polish television, and I happened to be in Poland when the Pope died, Pope John Paul II. So this was a huge thing for their culture, because he was so important to the Polish identity. And they were doing an outdoor mass, and maybe 100,000 people were there. But they had these classical singers come up and an orchestra playing one of his pieces. And I remember just being in tears hearing this. It was absolutely incredible. And I said, now this music is something for the 20th century. This one answers the dilemmas of the 20th century. It was Wojciech Kilar. What was it? Angelus is what it was. And
what did you think of the coronation? Because there was parts of the king's.
Unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to watch it because I was busy when that was being run, and I didn't spend too much time going back. Not as much time as I spent with
drop in funeral. Onto a stream right when I would say the better part of the religious ceremony began. It was almost synchronistic to me, because I went back and we both rewatched it, Christina and I was like, oh, this is horrible. Like, this is not what I watched. The 40 minutes that I watched online was beautiful. And then the before this bit that I watched and the after the bit I watched was like just lame.
Did they play like pop music?
No, they did most of the traditional hymns. They shortened and condensed everything in, but there was a section there where they were doing, you could say, the rites of passage. They had gone beyond just the sacraments of this is this thing, we're going to place this thing on you, and we're saying this prayer, into the, you could say, the more traditional Catholic like religious ceremonies and hymns.
Right.
And it caught me off guard. It's like, this is what it's like. Like, this is the smell of the old world. Like, people singing up, and this whole hall is resonating with some greater power, you could say. That was millions of people are going to watch this like that. It just started to catch me out. It's like, what's happening here? Are we witnessing fire being relit, or are we just getting nostalgic for what we've lost? And I wondered that if you had watched that service and you had a read on it, because
I did watch, and I saved a 5-hour clip of the Queen's funeral, and I was really impressed with that. And because to me, that reminded people of exactly what the older world was like. That is to say, because it was the older world. It was the last, vestige of a certain kind of a thing. And I suspect Charles has certainly harked back to that, but probably had newer additions. I don't know. But yeah, unfortunately, I didn't see it yet. And
I think Andrew Lloyd Webber had a theme that he'd written this century.
Yes. So yeah.
That was weird.
Yeah, and his stuff tends to be sappy.
Yes. Yes.
Nice
word.
I like
out of place because you're going for this old bundle, and you've got the nice orchestra going on, and everyone's like fully serious. And now we're going to play this hymn written for King Charles, and I'm like, what? This is just, it didn't have the texture, the backbone of some of these older pieces. It felt I'm trying to avoid all the contemporary language.
Or you can say it in contemporary.
It felt homogenized, put it that way.
Yeah.
It felt homogenized.
No, one of the big problems in contemporary culture is the fact that we don't know how to do serious music anymore, which in Poland, they didn't have that problem. And Poland has more composers now that are really worth noting than anywhere. I remember going into a Polish store and looking through CDs, and they had endless Polish composers that no one outside of Poland had ever heard. And I'm not talking about the big three there that I mentioned, and there are others, but I was just like, wow. And these just stay in this country. If I go to France, I don't see any of these people in the racks of Polish music. A few of them in Germany, it's a little closer, but it's the same with Georgia. They do have a problem with kind of a pop electronic music infestation among the young. But when you go into churches, there's no problem. You don't have, I'm used to in America, which is the terrifying praise songs and stuff that are just these really repetitious, badly written.
We can talk about that. I've come out of that tradition.
Didn't Hillsong come from Australia? Correctly? What do you think of that?
Oh gosh, we've got 4 minutes left before the stream ends. We can get into.
Okay. Well, first of all, in a couple of words, tell me about where it started, and then I'm going to cut you off, and then we'll go to the next one.
Okay. If you have Whig sensibilities and you've come out of a loss of the Anglican, a loss of the traditional, and you're trying, and also you've got the Jesus movements coming down to Australia as well. And you also have this surfy sort of, it's kind of like a reformed bohemian sensibility down here as well. So you grab these different textures, and you want to do a church, and you know that the Baptists are doing some sort of contemporization with their guitars and acoustic and flutes, and you're thinking, okay, well, that's the Peter Paul Mary thing. We've done that. Okay, we've got this British pop rock Blur thing going on, and so Hillsong with their sort of, again, they've got this idea of Whig sort of history. Okay, we can do this too. We can contemporize, and so we will do this sort of British pop rock. We'll grab a bit of U2, and we'll just we're essentially doing the Bob Dylan at New Folk Festival. Let's instead of like having acoustic guitars, let's plug an electric guitar in and see how this gets to go. And I want to say something controversial. I think it started with good intentions, but I think the problem is once you what's that fallacy? What do you
think about it for a moment? Think about it.
Yeah.
And I'm going to cut you off now, and we'll be back. Look to your email.
Okay, cool. So yes, the song fallacy. So it started off, I think, with good intentions, and then, well, you got the personification of the self, right? That's coming through. It's I, instead of we worship, it's I worship. And then you have the personalization of Christ. It's no longer we pray as a collective. It's I'm praying individually to God. So we have the invention of the modern self and the Carl Truman sort of framework coming through, and as well as you have the individualism of rock music, and that's a bohemian spirit coming through, and then you have some Christians trying to contemporize, trying to get on with the modern times. That's why I was trying to link it to that sort of the weak sort of history idea of like if we don't want to be left behind in our sort of contemporary approach of trying to make the gospel relevant, and also these sort of boomers, sorry to call you out, the Jesus freak boomers.
Hey, I've never identified with my
they
own
saw
species.
It's okay. I just wanted to say
it doesn't matter.
So yeah, I know it doesn't matter. So a lot of them got caught up in the Jesus revolution down here, and that had its own sort of language instruction, a different identification, I guess, because of, as I was saying, the Australian spirit has a more laissez-faire sort of attitude. Yeah.
Can you give me some examples of how you see these different things you're mentioning coming out in the music?
Okay. Well, Hillsong actually splits itself off. It starts with this sort of U2 delirious. There's a band down here called it's an American band that had their biggest single, Hanging by the Moment. I'm not sure if you remember that. It was a Lifehouse song. They had the most amount of plays of that song from that American band was actually down here, and that was a big song. Like, it wasn't just Christians; it was everyone had that song playing, and that's what Hillsong comes on. And then you have a song that comes out by a guy called Marty Smith, called "Jesus, You Are My Best Friend." I think that was the turning point where you've gone from this sort of white gospel music. I'll just say it like that. You've gone from like white gospel music to, okay, now I'm going to write sort of my personal experience. There's another song down here called All Day. It's about living my truth, telling all my friends I'm gonna live this thing. It is in some ways, yeah, it's a kind of romanticization of their personal testimony and trying to twist these different ideas or contemporize these different ideas into a solid object, a solid thing. The problem was when you take that and make it a corporal experience that everyone's meant to agree with somehow. And then there's different shifts and turns with that. I guess it does somewhat get pulled back by the 2010s. Enough people say, okay, if we're going to sing this, it's not as a personal journey, but as a church. In some sense, I think the Baptists kind of won that fight between the Pentecostals and the evangelicals and whatever else. So I think enough of the Baptist reactionaries said, hey guys, you're going too far here. And that's when Hillsong starts to kind of smoothen out in its sort of theology. But it's only gone downhill from there again, obviously, because of Brian Houston. He's falling out. So I'm not sure Hillsong is going to play itself out. I think it's in its last legs.
Right.
And obviously it was a music movement first, not a theological movement.
Sure. Well, I mean, they're known for having their own variation on the praise song thing that developed back in the 70s and 80s. But theirs seems much more elaborate in terms, not so much in terms of the song itself, but in terms of like the length of the song, the dynamics of the song.
Yeah, dynamics are huge.
What have you been to those churches?
I used to be in one. I used to play on
What was
stage.
it like? Tell me about
it. So I was a part of it's essentially sort of the same thing called Christian City Church, C3. I kind of came in on a fourth wave of generation coming through, and as I said, I got a music scholarship to come over here to I guess, be a part of this sort of culture, this sort of Christianity. What was it like? It tore me apart. I can't go back to one of those services now without feeling some deep level of cringe. I used to play on stage and go, these same people are coming up for an altar call service or a special healing service. These are the same people every time. Doesn't matter what the sorry, it's really black-pilled in some sense, but it was really tough to see, okay, these are the same people wanting this emotional dopaminic urge sort of fix from this, and it's maybe that's necessary. It's hard to know if we are fulfilling a true obligation or if we're just manipulating an audience through the context of music.
Right. Did you feel that you were doing something manipulative at times?
Yeah, towards the end, it was quite dark. But in the same thing, I think it was dark for me because I was the most outspoken, artistic, creative. I was on the fringe. I was the one saying, okay, I'm not just going to play your standard guitar lyrics. I'm going to explode this entire musical scene with different palettes and colors and moods. And I'm not just going to play your, 1-5-6-4 progression the same way every time. And that kind of got me into a lot of good books and bad books. But towards the end, even that sort of acceptance of the new, and not even I guess I wasn't even doing it in a progressive sense. I was doing it in the sense of, well, if we are meant to make Christian art, we are meant to discover things and change things. We can't just do the same set every week and expect to have the formula always works, right? Like that was something I was rebelling against.
Yeah.
In some sense, or in a true sense, I guess in a Protestant sense.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, interestingly enough, I just had a conversation with Ellis Potter about music, and we brought up a lot of these same things. I'm not going to repeat a lot of what I said to him, but I've decided I'm putting your conversation on first because you actually are explaining more of the nuts and bolts of the Hillsong stuff, whereas he discusses it from a very different angle. And I'm going to, that way, what he says will make more sense. And he is also a pastor, and there is a problem with Christian music. I mean, I've noticed this forever. And when I was in the Jesus People back in the OG days, I noticed something at a certain point. I started playing music as a result of being in the Jesus movement.
Yeah.
And without going into what we were doing at first, and a lot of this I talked about with Ellis, but one of the things I noticed was after a while, I noticed if I do X and X and X as a sequence of songs or a certain kind of a song or extend it a certain way, I will get X and X and X result from the people, which would be a lot of people raising their hands, feeling the spirit kind of thing. And I became extremely suspicious of that effect.
Yeah.
And later, I had the exact same experience you did. After I was at L'Abri, which is where I first heard Francis Schaeffer. Actually, I didn't hear him say this, but I heard him in a lecture that was on tape. He was saying he was worried about this one bluegrass gospel thing, and he says, my question about this is it actual gospel music or is it commercial? That is to say, is it just being done for the market, for the audience? And that was the first time I'd ever heard anyone bring that up before. This was about 1978. And I realized back in the early Jesus movement, we would talk endlessly about whether Christians could do rock music, which obviously by the time you entered the stage, literally, that had been resolved. And here's what we never, ever discussed, which we should have been higher on the list than should Christians play rock music, is can Christians play commercial music simply made to sell with certain kinds of ingredients? Like a McDonald's hamburger is a hamburger made to sell. So it doesn't have a lot of funky ingredients you might add if you're making a hamburger at home. It's not too thick, doesn't have a weird kind of cheese on it, doesn't have, hot peppers in it, doesn't have, a different kind of lettuce. A McDonald's hamburger is always the same. And my feeling now is we have turned Christian music into the Christian equivalent of McDonald's hamburgers.
Is it? There's a book that I did read on this in the middle of my Bible school days. It's called Addicted to Mediocrity. I'm not sure if it's Francis.
That was written by Frank Schaeffer, who is Francis Schaeffer's son. And if you go back to Paul Vanderklay, that was one of the first things we talked about when I met him. He was wondering if there was anybody out there who had any experience of L'Abri. He didn't even know they existed. And I got in touch with him and said, yeah, me. I was there. I knew Frank Schaeffer then. So yeah, and he had good points on that. Unfortunately, he himself could not follow his own rules when it came to, for instance, making Christian movies and stuff because of the market. And the problem is the market forces people to make music, movies, whatever, to sell. And everyone knows if you add certain ingredients, this one will sell better. But it isn't better, any more than a diet of McDonald's hamburger is better for you than home cooked meals. Well,
thanks for allowing me to talk about this. Obviously talk about this, and I have talked about with people that I still keep in contact with.
Right.
I haven't. Yeah, I kind of left C3 about 4 or 5 years ago after being pretty integral on the stage in some aspects. And we can go into different aspects, but I think, and I'm happy to. You're gonna have pro compare a bit, but I'm fine with that. But I guess what I wanted to say to what you just said then was that some of the commodification of these albums that were made by the Christian music team weren't actually made by the Christian music team. They were made by the senior pastors. They were made by a preference set coming down on high, and then the musicians had to enact that preference set to a T. Otherwise, you could write a great song, it could be recorded to get everything, but if it was not agreed upon by the higher ups, so to speak, it wouldn't make the cut.
Right.
And you'd be like, okay, all these people with such great talent work to make something maybe that was sincere or humbled or maybe even convicted. You could throw an adjective in there.
Right.
But if it didn't meet the certain agenda of that, and even the art styles of the cover art or the art styles of that music video shoot were all dictated by 3 people, which really dictated by one,
right,
the lead role, and then if he didn't appreciate it, it was out.
Right.
And so
well, I don't know if you ever heard the Neo hymn "In Christ Alone." Have you ever heard that? Yeah. Which I think done in a certain way is a very good song. There's a couple of lines I would change for doctrinal reasons, but basically I felt it was done well, an interesting progression. Then I bought the album that it originally appears on. And we did it back in Alaska every now and then, just funky instrumentation and stuff. But as soon as I heard the album, I said, oh, these people this is the reason why people can't get off the ground with any of these new hymns, is because when I heard the instrumentation, I heard something immediately that said McDonald's. It immediately said, this is a commodity. And it has to do, and a lot of it has to do not with the tune itself, but with all the accompanying progressions, chord progressions. It has to do with the sound design. It has to do with the way it feels. And it creates, there's a couple things I'm going to do fairly soon while I'm working on my Cute and Creepy series, which I wanted to work on today, but we're doing this. And one of those things is I talk sometimes about a triangle of not just music, but almost anything of artistic, cultural production.
Yeah.
And in that triangle on top, you have the meaning, which would later be cut off and become capital A art. And on one side, you have the function, the place of the thing, the way it fits in. And eventually that would just be cut off, almost disappear, and then end up all musical recordings would end up being in this category, some sort of weird silence killer. And then on the other side, you have the ability of the thing to communicate. This is why I was saying, like, people still remember Beethoven because they can hum some of his songs. You can start playing the Moonlight Sonata and people will go like, oh, Beethoven. Even if they can't quite hum it, they're aware. As soon as they hear that, it has a certain kind of a power to be recalled and to enter into. So it's the ability to communicate, which then, after this element pulls itself away, the art element pulls itself away, not wanting to be polluted by these other elements. We're making music that has no place, and we're not trying to be commercial. Then the commercial element turns into, what we see today. It's completely separated from meaning to the degree possible. You can always find some kind of meaning in it. And it's separated from a function, again, to the degree possible. But you walk into a cafe and you just hear music above you. Well, now that's what's happened to, people used to sing work songs. They used to sing songs to teach children different things. I have an Aboriginal song about teaching the children about fire. The alphabet song, that kind of thing. You had songs that told ballads and stories, myths, legends, obviously songs of love, but everything had a place. So a dance tune was there for the dancing.
Yeah. Whereas
now, if you walk into a cafe, who knows what you'll hear, but it's there to fill in the space of what happens if there's no music. Imagine the scenario. You walk into a cafe, you have to leave your phone behind, and there's no music. Now what are people going to do? They're going to go insane because they are so used to having things fill in the gaps.
Yeah. Or they'll tap away, or they'll get impatient actually, because it's an aesthetic hole.
But the problem is, over here, all the commercial stuff basically goes over into this entertainment zone. And the entertainment zone is they're largely not to have its meaning revealed to anyone. It's there just simply as a rhythm. And as scientists have discovered, if these kinds of rhythms go on for 20 minutes or more, people get swept up into them in an almost hypnotic way.
Yeah,
and I think that's what's going on when these praise teams and stuff lead people in a song. I think one of the Hillsong ones that was brought up to Alaska, the phrase "I believe" just kept repeating.
Yeah,
and I just said to myself, I have, but I don't exercise it much anymore. A motto that I don't sing songs I don't like, and I don't sing songs I don't agree with. And this one, and I'll sit in church and everyone else is singing and I'm just reading through the Bible. I think it's a good time to do it. I'm not trying to show them that I dislike church. I'm trying to show them that church, something's happened to it. And so it's just a silent witness rather than being obnoxious about it. But
I can talk to you. Your point. Yeah.
But anyway, as these people were singing, I believe, I believe, I believe. Now we didn't, we were a funky little church that had not particularly good guitar player and blah, blah, blah. So you didn't have all the accoutrements that make this stuff really send out, the PA system that's, grand, the theatrical hall rather than a church, this kind of stuff. But I realized if these people are singing I believe over and over and over, it's because they don't know what they believe and they're trying to work up faith through their emotions. Anyway, you had a thought?
Oh no, I can talk to you about one. I got 3 or 4 big rock on the shoe moments to do with Christianity.
Okay, pull one out and let's talk about it.
I went to a 30 Seconds to Mars concert.
Okay.
You know who 30 Seconds to Mars is? Jared Leto.
Yeah.
Highly Gnostic, borderline satanic. Now, let's see, back then he had an album coming out that I quite liked at the time called This Is War. Mm-hmm. And I remember this organization, this church organization, they have one of the pavilions, one of the music halls. It's like a conference room, but it can double as a music hall. It's called the Horton Pavilion. 3 weeks before I saw 30 Seconds to Mars, my church group had hired that out to do a conference for 3 or 4 days. I didn't play at that conference. I helped out behind the scenes and do that sort of thing. But I was still there, and all the people, people raising their hands, getting all into it, prep speeches. 3 weeks later, I come back to the same music hall, completely different atmosphere, but it's the same type of music, and it's the same type of people making the same reactions. Like, these are young people, these are impressionable, these getting into it. It's just a different ideology, essentially, that they're glorifying. And I even, if I go to any sort of music festival, I'm either close to the front or at the sound booth. It's right there, wherever the sound guy is. If I can get close to that, because if it sucks, if I can stand right near that sound booth, and if it sucks there, I know either this guy is crap or the venue is crap.
Right.
But as I sat there, and I saw observing all these people behaving in the same ways that were from my church group before, and going, well, what's different here? What's going on? Like, these same type of reactions. These are the same type of people in some sense, same type of generational. But, and then, what do I do with that? Because the inference of this music or the emphasis of this music is going to different places, and it has a different telos, you could say, which got to the weird point where, because I'm standing near the sound desk, little Mr. Jared Leto comes out and he does an acoustic guitar set, and I'm right there, looking up at him and going, he's a worship leader. Fuck. What's going on? Yeah, what's going on?
When you see those kinds of comparisons and connections, it's hard not to see them anymore. And you realize, see, what's interesting, I just got a book of the big Sacred Harp book. It's like 400 sacred harp songs in there. And I've also been thinking about Christian music for a long time because I was involved with it.
Yeah.
But as I've been thinking about it, I realized that the church has been following culture for a while now. And when I start thinking about when that first started, it seems to have started in the 1870s. And there were these revival meetings in America that were, D.L. Moody was there, and I think D.L. Moody's man was Iris Sankey. There's different ones. I think Homer Rodeheaver was with Billy Sunday later. Anyway, hold on a second. I'm going to sneeze. Am I? Hold on. Maybe not. Okay, sorry. So, but what's interesting is they started playing a kind of music with these songs. And it's a kind of a song style that starts in the late 1800s in America and goes through one form or another all the way up to the Jesus movement, although it gets worse and worse and worse as it goes. But some of these songs you've probably seen in hymnals, like In the Garden. He walks with me and he talks with me and he tells me I am his own, and the joy we share as we tarry there, none other has ever known. Which, okay, you have an individual relationship with God, fine. But that's not what that song is about. The song is about these romantic feelings. And what's happened is the Romantic movement, which is about 100 years before the 1870s, has now turned into a cultural commercial movement. These people are getting their musical cues from circuses. They're getting their musical cues from the entertainment of their day. So, for instance, whenever I hear these songs, I just immediately imagine carnival music, and it's like, there's the song. It's a band organ. And this is what was happening. It was also, there were other commercial forms that were just starting. There isn't anything like what I would call serious commercial music prior to about the 1840s. And that is to say, yeah, they were selling sheet music, but it was still quarantined into sheet music. You'd play it at home on your piano or whatever. But it isn't until you get to minstrel music. I don't know if you watched my minstrel video. You should if you haven't, because it explains the origin of commercial music. It's called the most taboo music in America. And
yeah, I have watched that.
Yeah, but it's that making an imitation of something and putting it into musical form. So the Christians got the idea, and then they just kept copying. So, but here's the interesting thing: all the sacred harp songs, the lining out tunes of the primitive Baptists, the Lutheran churches' music, which was quite a high art, culminating in Bach, but continuing from there. There's the Georgian hymns that we sing here. These things are all us calling the shots. Black gospel music is not a bad music. It is a great music, but interestingly enough, when a lot of my white people friends in America go to do Black music, they do this thing called spirituals, which is to gospel music or Black Christian music what minstrel music is to what Black people were actually doing, playing music. It's an imitation of it. It's a sweetening of it is the best way to understand it. So someone singing Sweet Low, Sweet Chariot, yeah, you can do a good version of that, but you're not really doing something that's from that tradition. You're doing the kind of white, sweetened, romanticized version of it, again coming from the same epoch, after the Civil War, which I think is really important.
How do you make sense of the Johnny Cash and
Johnny
Ray
Cash
Charles,
is great.
all those? Yeah.
And the reason Johnny Cash is great is because he can reinterpret almost anything and make it real. I think that commercial music can be made. For instance, I'm not a big fan of anything, but easy listening music from the middle of the 20th century to me is just, it was a bad move on the board. However, I've heard like a street singer in New York City singing what I would have previously considered a fairly commercial Nat King Cole song and turn it into something real, because he's sitting there playing with a bass connected to a washtub bass. And he's singing it, and you can feel it. And I'm saying, so these things can actually be turned back into real music. They just require some real change up on the accompaniment, and they require some real honesty and changing sometimes the tunes a bit, just to reflect that. So I think that what's happened to the Christians, and once the Jesus movement came, what happened was the Christians then really started following secular trends. So DC talk is there in order to communicate to the young. Whereas my feeling is, if your church had sacred harp songs, they wouldn't need DC talk, because this would be stronger. And those songs are strong. They're very strong. It's just like there's a kind of a strange Pentecostal church called the International House of Prayer, which sounds like IHOP, but they doctrinally, I'm not going to go into it, but musically, they do almost all their gospel songs with trombones. Now this is a thick sound, and they do it, an embankment of trombones, occasionally a tuba, now and then a trumpet might be able to get into the mix, and drums. But here's the thing: when you go to one of their churches, their kids aren't pretending to be pop stars. They don't do air guitar. They do air trombone. and they just, they do this thing. Why? Because the music is much stronger than the music in the world. And that's what the Christians lacked, is that they didn't trust their own traditions as much. They wanted to get more emotional pizzazz out of them, because they fell into the trap of saying, if we sound more like the people outside of us, the people who are having all these rock hits, the rappers and the pop musicians, let's have a Christian rave, whatever. Then, but I'm sitting there saying, you can't have a Christian rave. By its concept, that would not be a Christian event, no matter how much you paint Jesus all over it, because it's about just kind of like dancing and just getting into the state. And that would be the opposite of what Jesus talks about when he says, when you pray, do not pray as the heathen do. You think that they will be heard, and there are many repetitions, So the idea that you could use that kind of repetitious formula as a Christian musical event, but it's seductive because people want to be relevant. They want to be, but look, I find it really fascinating what's happening with the Orthodox. They're relevant because they're totally irrelevant.
Yeah.
They're relevant because so many other churches followed like what the Hillsong types are doing. They're trying to get more people in. They come in, there are churches, or huge mega churches in America, where everyone gets swept up in the music. And I've been to a few events when I was younger like that, and I understand it. I've felt that way. But the event is well, I think God forgives us, but it's not quite what God is wanting from us. God wants humility. God wants depth. God wants reality. God wants honest emotion. One of the worst experiences I ever had, and I don't know if you know the song "Shine Jesus Shine." You probably heard that song, right? Yeah. It was a 90s praise song. Anyway, it just has a really almost nursery school tune.
Gospel.
Shine Jesus shine. I won't go any further, but I heard that at a funeral once. I heard it at a funeral once, and I'm sitting there saying, this is the only time you get to like really publicly cry and people can commiserate with you, and you're playing this cute pablum, and that told me, that was in the 90s. I went to that funeral, and that was in Alaska, and I just got so mad.
One of the worst things Protestants did was give up Holy Saturday.
Mm-hmm.
They do Easter Friday, they do Holy Sunday, but they don't do Holy Saturday. Right. Without that, it's meant to be a movement of three. You're meant to have three. You meant to, by pulling that place for sacred sadness, for silence, for contemplation, you're removing a whole texture, a whole set of guiding principles from your tradition. Right. There's meant to be a time and place for even, I guess, because these matter with an artistic expression as well. So if you don't have that sort of that middle point of sadness or relief or a value, if you don't value that, of course your art's not going to reflect that either.
Right.
So,
I think that's also why
Martin Luther.
Yeah, I think that's also why the people who found a door out of the modernist, postmodernist dilemma were Catholics and Orthodox who had been through some of the worst experiences in the world. But their faith was unchanged by it, even though you listen to the music and you go like, well, that's not the 19th century. Nevertheless, it again, it's like these people aren't following anyone. They're creating the music they feel they should create, and that's the problem with commercial music. And I think I am going to do a video at some point called something like "What Makes Music Bad." And a lot of people will say things like, well, nothing, any kind of music is good. And I'm going like, no, you don't understand. There are actually musical things you can do. I mean, not what makes the lyrics bad, but what makes the music itself bad. Yeah. And there are things you can do to make it bad. And those things, it isn't just the tune. it's the whole environment of the piece. And this is what, alas, my Christian friends do. They tend to believe that anything offered to God is worthy, whereas it says in the Bible, he who is skilled in his craft will be brought before kings. And so the emphasis in the Bible is on the skill involved. You're not supposed to bring, this is the problem with the inclusion ideology, is that, you can let anyone do anything in the name of inclusion. And if it's bad, you can't say anything, which is how we got to where we are on political front. Because it starts, I think a lot of this starts, the inability to speak and criticize comes from the positive thinking aspects. It's just like, no, we want to always encourage. Where it's interesting living in Georgia here. And also there are Russians here now too. So I didn't even get a warning on that this time. So
I warned you. So I was like, no, just let him.
Yeah, just cut him off. We don't like what he's saying. So, but yeah, so I think that we often forget that the music itself is affected by the philosophy behind it. And our religion happens to be consumption, maybe in the old 19th century sense of the word, where we're dying of consumption, but it shows up in the music, that or nihilism. Those are our two reigning kind of competing philosophies so often. And even the people who are kind of on the woke spectrum, their music is basically about consumption too. And so is the Christians. Yeah. Everybody is consuming music. And in fact, you can tell because this is what they're doing. They're no longer making music out in the world, taking part in it. They don't sit around at home playing guitar together. Most of them. They instead do this. They put a little something in their ears and they just.
Or the alternative, they're just not listening. You'd be surprised the amount of quiet cars.
Oh yeah.
I hear land. And like I grew, obviously I'm a child of the 2000s in some aspects. Right. Like that's when I was and I remember, you'd always you'd go down to any popular area and you'd hear Blink 182, or you'd hear Rage Against the Machine, you'd hear Britney Spears or J-Lo or Justin Timberlake. You would hear people playing music from their car loudly and proudly too. That was the era of the car subwoofer. But that's not happening now.
But I have this dream. I have a dream that someday people will make music again in the real world. Not just digital music, not just stuff to pass files along, although I have nothing against that. But rather we need music. I have another a companion piece to the what makes music bad is what is music, and which I'll have to do first, obviously. And this is based on a lecture I gave quite a while ago, and it's that it isn't simply about the notes and such. It's also about how music has traditionally been used by people. And like I said, work music for dances, things like this. And it's not that music for dances is always good, because there's a lot of dancing that maybe the music isn't, at that point, maybe we're going too far one way or another. But nevertheless, that's how humans have always worked it. It's only once you throw into it the technological factor and then amplify through technology the commercial factor that you start having the kinds of problems we have in our world. And unfortunately, Christians are always the last ones. It seems like we're always holding the bag. So we're kind of holding the romanticism bag when most other people have kind of given up on it. But we're going to make ourselves feel good.
Yeah. Well, like the other strange, I guess, another rock in the shoe moment for me is realizing that I'm one of the first generations to be brought up on Christian music per se. As in, I don't know. I was brought up in a household where the preference was Christian music, not just music. It was, or if I want to listen to something that sounds like Blink 182, what I'm allowed to listen to is Reliant K. And these substitutes lead to improper aesthetics and tastes.
Yeah.
And it's taken a good chunk of my life to have a broad perspective on things.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's why the air trombone stuff is so interesting to me. Is that you have a church that makes music so good that it's better than that. The kids don't want to listen to the other stuff. They like their stuff. And that is something that I would say a majority of churches need to get some sense of back, without turning.
I did an album, when I sent you a link to it, called Open Futures, which is me trying to do, trying to take the ball, the fire, the flame somewhere, and it's about a lot of things, Aaron. So what it does is that it follows the liturgical pattern. You could say it's the story cycle to some aspects, but I think the story cycle is kind of a commodification of ancient Celtic prayers and understandings of cyclical time. But I think we just modernized the phenomena of mythology. So, it follows it's 20 minutes. It's short. Again, another sort of ancient pattern is these we didn't have.
Is this where in SoundCloud or
it's everywhere. So it's on Spotify. It's got 2 songs.
Well, send me some links to give it to so I can put it down below so other people can listen to it.
I appreciate that. No, it'd be good. So the idea
is there
was
any way that you can come here in October be a part of our thing?
Love that. I gotta look at the finances. I gotta look at
we'll do, because I think just even on a musical level, we'll find this place will inspire so many thoughts. But the point is to be talking exactly about these kinds of issues with a group of people after being exposed to different artistic phenomena that I find worth spending time with. So, and anyway, think seriously about it. So, and also to the rest of you watching this conversation, wherever you are. I do have, I think, 4 more spaces left. So,
I've got to get permission. Some aspects to spend money.
Seriously,
it's a strange year. Yeah.
Seriously.
I know. Okay, thank you for the encouragement. So with Open Futures, there's no lyrics, but it's lyrical.
Mm-hmm.
So it's in that mode of Sigur Rós, but done in a Christian style, but then breaking everything Sigur Rós thought was good. It's thought this is just meaningless singing. Now but this is meaningful chanting. We're going back, to a chant out to a direction, to a telos.
Right.
That was the idea. And then I had and that was with a ex-musician from the same. Well, no, I'm the ex-musician, but he's still a part of that organization, although he has difficulties with it. But we tried to break ground with that record. We tried to point towards the meaninglessness of Christian art and point it. And I guess in some sense, I've started to think about it as a Christian romanticism, as in maybe we should actually adopt it in some aspects, because maybe the romanticism does have an antidote to something.
Here is what I would suggest. We've got 2 problems going on at once here. One problem is, what do people sing and what kind of music happens in church? The other problem is, how do we get past the cultural divides that we are in at the moment? Yeah. And the answer to both of those is not the same. So what I think might be helpful is that, for instance, I appreciate people who are Christian, who are who are musicians who happen to be Christians, more than I appreciate Christian musicians. Because Christian musicians, what that tells me, I have this huge book. It's about this thick. Which way is this? This thing's like reversed. Anyway, it's huge. It's like this thick, and it's all, I don't know, 700-800 pages of encyclopedia of CCM, which they say is something like Christian contemporary music. I call it commercial Christian music. And so, and it's amazing how much of that music nobody outside the Christian world has heard.
Yeah.
It's just,
yeah.
It doesn't, and if you do hear it, you go like, oh, yeah.
You want to know a strange thing? It randomly came up on YouTube the other day. I just typed in a word, and it came up with a Hillsong song. It had almost 17 million plays or listens.
Oh.
You're like, what? What?
Nice of them. And who's getting all that money?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. It was YouTube, so it's not a lot, but they're still getting.
No, but 17 million is actually quite a bit of money. If that's being monetized,
Of course it is.
I mean, we got a hymnal in Alaska that, I don't know, it's about, I'm going to do this, but it's about that thick.
Yeah.
And the last fifth of the book, what they've done is they've taken all the old songs and stuff and then made new, they've added arrangements, but more importantly, they've added song sequences.
Yeah.
And the last fifth of the book, all copyright. And I'm sitting there going like, wait a second, you can charge me copyright for your album or whatever, but Christian songs, we should just be able to sing these because they're not about money. They're not, I don't want to see how much money you're making off the fact that we're singing out of this particular book. I'd much rather have a song with nothing but copyright, royalty-free music, because this is worship. Yeah. This is not, again, the answer to these two questions, I'm not against copyright. I'm not against people making money off their art, but I am against making money off of naive Christian church people, which is what it is, because nobody else in the congregation I was in even noticed it. Those are just pages you just kind of like casually, it's like you go blind.
Yeah.
You don't see them. But I noticed stuff like that because I say like, so this is pretty weird that there would be this much, because I remember I have older hymnals. They don't have those at the end.
Wow. Well, this phenomenon started in art too. Maybe that's a different chat between us. But the phenomenon of artists, they will just make the patron come in, or a group of people commission an artwork, and they wouldn't sign. And then it's not until you get to the 18th century where people start to sign their name for the recognition that, this is a Caravaggio, or this is, Grass.
Yeah.
Or,
well, all of these things are connected.
Yeah.
And so what happened in art?
I have a big Van Gogh behind here, because Van Gogh is kind of one of my icons of, I consider Van Gogh the last great Christian artist in the sense that he was a Christian. If you actually go, I've got a book of his letters to his brother and other associates, and he's in that Kierkegaardian sense of struggling with sense of in place and reality and what's going on.
Have you seen the French artist Georges Rouault?
No.
Ruault. Georges Rouault. He was a Catholic, and his work goes into the early 20th century, and he's quite interesting. And you can tell, I mean, he's an expressionist, but very interesting. And there are others, but and so all of these questions are huge. And what's funny is, I've been dealing with these since the late 70s when I went to L'Abri. And I'm always amazed to hear that nobody has been dealing, it's just like, okay, so I guess you guys didn't get the message then. It didn't spread through the churches. It didn't spread through culture. And so you find weird things, just contradictions. I sometimes will occasionally just put words together like Christian and then fill in something that it really shouldn't go with, like stripper. And find them, and there's
actually a lady on that. Do you know this channel called Whatever? Have you heard of this?
No.
The guy gets a bunch of different rowdy people in, and sort of a TikTok meme show. It goes for about 3-4 hours, and he cuts it all down into little clips. But this lady came on. I didn't watch the whole thing. Obviously, it was 4 hours, but I watched a clip of it saying that she was a Christian model on OnlyFans, and it's like, what?
Well, I'm sure people are feeling blessed as a result. That's all I can say.
Ridiculous.
And I mean feeling blessed. Anyway, so oh yeah, what a weird world we live in. So, well, anyway, I should get going, and I appreciated this. I am trying to put together a group of Christian musicians who more and more have been getting in touch with me, and I'd like to include you. Of course, the problem is, given where I am, and given where you are, and given where they are, it's going to be very difficult. So I'm going to do one without you at first, but eventually I'm going to find a way to get you in there and maybe just deal with the people on the West Coast in America or something like that, who can also...
as a chat?
Yeah, a chat discussing these kinds of things, particularly amongst musicians. So I seem to have picked up a musicians along the way who kind of get like, oh, he's saying something, I should listen. And that would be an interesting thing to do.
Well, yeah, I guess to say something strange, although we haven't talked about it in this discussion, like I would consider myself an artist first, and then the music comes second.
Good.
That's and then like Christianity or spirituality that's the stuff that informs up.
Well, that's what made Johnny Cash so good.
Yeah,
he was always a musician first.
Yeah.
And then we find out Johnny Cash is a Christian, but Johnny Cash also does rockabilly, and Johnny Cash is influenced by gospel music, and Johnny Cash is influenced by the blues. And it's essentially, if you look at Johnny Cash, you have almost all of traditional American music history funneled into one person, and he happens to be a Christian.
Yeah,
and not one without struggles, you know.
Oh yeah. Well, that's what made his music and I guess his art.
Well, exactly.
So impactful.
I mean, that's why also he is respected by people who don't believe in God at all. It's because they first see the honesty of the person, and then they find, oh yeah, we had that religious thing. You know, but when he had a television show, he made sure to include one hymn or gospel song per show.
Huh.
Yeah, and the show lasted for a year and a half or so. So you know, and you know, that kind of person is very rare. Sometimes he'll go a little too overboard and make albums and stuff that got a little preachy, but that wasn't that often. So
like a Dylan. Well, Dylan has his moments.
Yeah, it's easy to especially for new converts. New converts are always like want to just say everything they now believe. So
in terms of, if anyone's wondering who this guy up here is, this is Tolkien. I just put this up.
Who is it?
Up here.
I just see kind of gray and white and black.
Gray and black. Yeah, I just put that up as another sort of I don't know if icon's the right word, but something akin to that. Someone to go, okay, cool. What would making this piece of music or thinking about art, like, okay, who's the last great person to do it well? And I think, in terms of I think,
there are others, but
you
know,
I guess someone to look towards and contemplate. I've but that's just a recent phenomenon there.
Okay, Jesse. Well, we will talk again. I appreciated talking with you. And
I really enjoyed it. I was looking forward to this. So
and this should be up, I think, this weekend sometime. I'm not sure, Saturday or Sunday. So
just to see
yeah. Okay.
What the reaction is. I'll send you a link to the album. If you enjoy it,
do that, and then I will link it in the bottom of the video. And as the Georgians say, draw a beat temporarily. We will meet again. So.
And there you have it. I thought that was quite a fascinating discussion. We traveled from soundtracks, classical music, into what in the world is happening in church music in too many Protestant denominations, and quite a bit besides. And at the end, you'll see he said, I wanted to ask you about your other video you did, and I basically, oops, try it again sometime. And we will, Jesse, we will. Meanwhile, thanks for tuning in. The next Anadromous Dialogue will be out in about a week, and that will be with Ellis Potter, and I hope you enjoy it. And there are other things coming up. I do have a Prophetic Voices number 3, featuring the voices of not only old people, but old people from the past. And I just feel we spend too much time, far too much time in our Western cultures, and probably all over the world these days, listening to young people who really, I mean, when I was young, what did I know? Nothing. You know how to be cool. You know how to say people, ooh, I like this or that, but you don't know anything. It takes a while to get beat up by life to understand something. And it takes a while to read, and it takes a while to expose yourself to knowledge. So that's coming up. Yeah, and there's more. My lecture on puppetry in the 21st century, a new lecture that's not the same as the old one, and which will answer the question, why puppets burn? Which people write jokingly sometimes, like, what's with the puppets? To which I'm sitting there saying, I'm thinking about the future. What are you thinking about? And of course, the cute and the creepy, which I wanted to work on today, but I got invited to a puppet show put on by Russians. What can you say? Cute and the creepy is coming. It'll be a special event when it does. The next one will be part 1 of the dark history of the cute, and it will be surprising. From Tbilisi, this is Burns saying Drobit. Later, we will meet again.
A people without history is not redeemed from time. For history is a pattern of timeless moments.